Good morning, everybody. Why have I got 2001 behind me? Well, as you've just seen from the video, we've been on a relatively long journey together, putting PCs on every desk, introducing email, introducing databases, collaboration technologies. But how many of our customers do you think are currently living in that today? In the enterprise, in the big space? How many of those customers do you think are living there? 50%? 60%? 40%?
10%? None of them?
Well, Microsoft knows that 70% of its customers are currently living on technologies that are 10 years old.
If we think back to 10 years and what's changed in 10 years, I mean, what was I searching with 10 years ago? You know, 10 years ago was before Google had become a verb. Matt, you're a lot younger than me. What were you up to 10 years ago?
Pretty sure I was wasting time watching Big Brother on TV. I think it had just come out at that time.
Yep, and when I look at who I flew up here with these last 10 years, I used to fly with this mob.
And I think this shows how bad my music taste is, but I think I was listening to Dido and to Travis, who had just come out in the UK. I think they were both topping the charts at that time.
So, but where were you getting that music from?
I definitely wasn't downloading it from Napster, that's for sure.
And you wouldn't know about these being English, would you?
No, I did have one, actually. Holden released the V2 Monaro at that time, and I actually had one in the UK, so a lot of memories in that car. And Microsoft, well, we launched Windows XP. So when I say people are on technology that are 10 years old, this is what I'm referring to. 70% of our enterprise and large business customers are still sitting on Windows XP. So for Microsoft, that's an enormous success. You know, it's on over 1 billion PCs, it's at home, it's in the office, it's mobile devices, on laptops, people are wandering around with it. But that technology, that experience the users are having is actually, is 10 years old. And so are all these other things we were talking about. And you've been around the conference now, and you've seen the world of work is changing. You've seen the innovation, you've seen the inventions, you've seen the things that our partners are coming out with, you've seen the things that Microsoft is coming out with in this space. And we know it's changing. People now have more than one device. They want to be able to actually consume information from those multiple devices. They want to be able to create information in the relevant way. They want to be able to work in a mobile manner. They want to be able to connect wherever they are, in the airport, wandering around, work all the hours they want to.
In a tech ed conference room?
In a tech ed conference room. And they want to be able to stay connected. This is, we provide Wi-Fi here, but again, how many of you have got 3G cards or modems or Wi-Fi dongles in your bags? These things are now kind of pervasive. You expect to be able to be connected. 10 years ago, very hard to find a fast internet connection. And you want to be able to do that regardless of where you go, wherever you travel, whichever country you're in. So why is this important? Well, these things are pressures that are pushing on IT, and technology is being, I guess, inside the enterprise, pushed on in a different manner. Things have changed. So people now expect to work differently. So there's actually a work-life blur occurring. Now, I don't know how many of you work a 9-to-5 day now and then just go home and forget about work. I certainly don't. A couple of people, you're lucky. We've changed the way we work. We kind of, pick the kids up from school at 3, or, we come in at 10 because the night before we had a party to go to. And the users that are coming into the workforce, the generation Ys, the guys who are now very, very savvy with technology, not necessarily in how it works or how it's constructed or architected, but more about how to use it. They're just adaptive, they expect things. And this digital generation, as we like to call them, are almost expectant to come into the workforce and get all the tools that they see outside of the workforce, inside the workforce. And they want to be able to do that across multiple devices. We've got a couple of devices here, which we're happy for people to come up and have a look at after, but they want to be able to, pull up their slates and play Angry Birds.
The biggest Angry Birds screen going on a slate.
Yeah, if anyone wants to do large screen Angry Birds. They want to be able to do that across multiple devices. They want to be able to access their email. They want to be able to get access to their work systems, their data.
They also want to be able to pick a sort of form factor that suits what they need to do at the time. So whether it's a slate this size, whether it's a mobile phone, whether it's a laptop, and changing form factors and sticking to one, as opposed to sticking to one device as we've done in the past, is very, very important. And, you know, as Matt mentioned, the sort of digital generation, anyone here got kids? Yeah. Have they ever struggled to get new technologies when they've come in? They just pick things up now. I mean, I remember when we first tried to use a mouse like in that video. Oh, where's it going? You watch kids today. They'll just pick up any technology, touch it, the way the user interface of that experience is designed. We've gone away from a lot of the challenges that we used to see. You know, users will never cope with change. Users are actually driving change now.
And that multiple devices conversation is one that we've been having with a lot of customers. And I think it's one just to bear in mind. IDC has done a lot of studies into this, and obviously they do projections of unit shipments, what's going to happen in the world with regards to the number of connected devices. The average affluent family is now globally owning 5 devices per head, and actually in the US, 7 connected devices.
I'd say
and this
more
is
in
due
Australia.
And possibly even more in Australia. These things are going to be explosive in the next 3 years. IDC is estimating that at the moment there's 700 million devices, and there's going to be 1.5 or more billion devices connected to the internet for the population that exists. Now that's way quicker than population growth. So how are we going to enable these things to come into your enterprises, to embrace them, to change these things? So the conversation then with customers becomes, okay, so we understand the market, we understand the backdrop, we understand things that are changing. So what do we do? Do we ignore it? This is a strategy some organizations are taking. Just pretend it's not there. Just let people bring stuff in, but we'll just, you know, we'll adapt to it as it happens.
Quick show of hands. Who's at this one at the minute? Yeah, thought so.
Do we resist it? There's very good reasons to resist it if you're in certain security firms and parts of the government, etc. But ultimately, these things are still coming in.
And
so
resistance
it's kind of
is futile, as we find out when the CEO gets whatever device he wants in the enterprise.
Or do we embrace and empower? Now, Microsoft believes that you should embrace and empower and say yes. And yes is a very important word, because when was the last time users came to you as the IT community and got excited about the things that you were trying to talk to them about? When did they last come to you and say, hey, I want this? It's been a long time. I've been, you know, normally I'm trying to talk to users and say, hey, have you seen this latest and greatest? And they're kind of like, oh, I'm all right with the stuff I've got. But now they're bringing stuff in and going, why can't I have an experience like I'm getting at home? Why can't I do this? Why can't I do these things? You know, I've seen this in other organizations. My friends have got this. They're engaging the conversation. They're beginning to drive that. And it's only going to get more accelerative over the next few years as people begin to have these multiple devices. They want to be able to work whenever they can. These pressures of choice are coming back to the user. So my name's Matt Furs. I'm a desktop specialist. So when I'm not talking about consumerization, I'm trying to help customers modernize their desktop, their deployment processes, and talk around the system center tool sets and trying to get IT in a position where they're ready to deploy the latest and greatest in a really agile fashion. And the reason I do that, I guess, is because I just enjoy delighting users, much like you guys do. You know, even down to, I mean, how many of you have had to fix a friend's PC because you work in IT? Surely you know something about computing. I get those things all the time, but actually I do it because I like to see the expression on the person's face at the end of the day when they actually pick that device up and go, yeah, Matt fixed this for me. You know, and actually I like it now, it's working for me.
He likes the free case of beer he gets for doing it as well.
That too.
I'm Leon Booth. I'm one of our desktop virtualization strategists. And like Matt, I've been around the desktop a long, long time. I've spent the past sort of 7 years at Microsoft in similar roles to Matt. I've been through the virtualization roller coaster, through the consumerization hype with a lot of our customers here in Australia. I spent a whole lot of time traveling around Australia, talking to our customers, understanding what the challenges are, what they're trying to achieve, but also trying to help them, as we said, embrace those or understand what's coming next or what we need to be ready for within our IT departments to be able to meet the challenges that we're going to face over the next few years.
So it's a fairly simple agenda. I think we're going to have a look at the opportunity more than the challenges of what this could actually bring you, trying to embrace this movement. We're going to talk a little bit around the technologies at a high level, a little bit of depth on some of the technologies, but there's obviously a lot of them that can help you enable consumerization. So I just want to kind of raise the visibility of what's in Microsoft's stack and our partner stack that might be able to make this a little bit easier for you to start adopting these devices. And then we want to talk a little bit around things you should be thinking about when you're starting to build a strategy around this. So how are you going to embrace these things and build a matrix of who should have what and when?
I think the strategy piece becomes very important as well, because the one thing we've learned, and as we go through the video and we've watched that, what we do know, it's not about what is there today and what's available today, because we know next week, next month, next year, the technologies are going to be different, the devices are going to be different. It's around building a strategy that's going to allow us to embrace that change, to cope with that change, not to have to re-engineer our IT infrastructures and our strategies every time there is a new technology or a new device that we need to deploy out there.
And I just wanted to credit you guys for starting and continuing consumerization, because one thing, I guess, the IT companies tend to take credit for consumerization, having the products, etc. But we know that you had to buy it, plan it, maintain it, upgrade it. And actually, you put a lot of technology in front of end users that drove their passion to now want things at home. I mean, you're also consumers yourselves. I mean, the IT pro community probably buys more of the latest and greatest devices than any other type of community, just because you want to see what the latest and greatest is, what it looks and feels like. And actually, that's something I just wanted to sort of just recognize there, because actually this is something we want you to continue to drive that passion into your user communities and not be fearful of what consumerization could bring.
So what that really means is, we had in a discussion yesterday, is we caused all these problems ourselves, so we can't complain about having to deal with them. So there's a couple of questions when we're thinking about the consumerization that we need to be asked. I mean, Matt, should everyone have access to all their corporate data everywhere?
No. I don't think they do today. No.
Or do they? We don't know. The devices we're using, should they have access, and should we be able to use them anywhere and do whatever we want to with those devices?
No, I don't think so. Well, not all of them.
Well, not? A device is a device, mate.
Not all of them.
No, a device is a device. Come on, surely we should be able to do that. What about wherever we are? If I'm sat in my office, I'm down at Macca's, I'm here at TechEd. Can I do everything everywhere?
I probably, maybe. I don't know. I don't think anyone's ever asked me that before.
I'm a user, mate. This is what I want to do.
No one's ever asked me.
Yeah, no, this is what I want to do, mate. And, with the technologies there, what's the issue?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of both. It's a technology and a policy issue, I suppose, when you think about these things. And these questions, the relevance of them is they haven't been asked for a very long time. They were kind of asked when PCs first came out, but they sometimes get asked in roundabout ways. But actually, if you look at what the answers to these things are going to be, and we'll go through the deck and explain this, the whole what's behind the scenes of these questions is kind of setting down what you think people should have access to, but also what they're desiring to have access to, and trying to meet in the middle and work out exactly how, when, should everything have access. And ultimately, we'll go through some of the technologies that can help you enable this in a granular way, so you can make those decisions as IT and work with users to enable them when they want access to these things.
So, mate, you give me any device I want, all's good, yeah?
Well, I'm a great believer in people bringing devices to work. They should be able to have access to flexible technology. But that's only the tip of the iceberg. Now, as you can see behind me, there's a lot of considerations here. How many of you are currently developing for iOS? Or have applications supported? What about Android? HTML5? Windows? Silverlight? You're beginning to see the problem, right? There's 5, 6, 7 platforms you probably need to start supporting, maintaining, lifecycling, updating. And even though these applications are getting lighter weight and you'll be able to build more APIs at the back end and developers are coming up with smart ways to do this, there's still a lot of considerations around how do I produce the best experience for these devices as they're coming into the organization? How do I maintain 6 lots of code and 6 types of deployment of those applications? Now, but what about security? Now, not all devices have the same level of security on them. So there's obviously going to be some challenges around that. So again, once the device comes in, has it got encryption? Has it not got encryption? What should it be able to have access to because of its limitations or because of its capabilities? Email. Such a simple one, but yet, how many people have had more phone calls to the help desk around what's the name of the Exchange server? What's my login details? These things begin to become more pervasive as more devices come in, because when they get a corporate asset that's domain joined, it just pushes the credentials to it. When they pick up a device that's not, they need to know all that background detail. Again, it's something that has to be facilitated if you're keen to support these devices in work.
And once they do find out where the email server is, how many devices do you have appearing collecting email that you never expected?
And so on and so forth. So even though there's a movement to move this in, and yes, we should definitely embrace that because the opportunity is massive, it's just about understanding all the stuff that sits below the surface that potentially could cause you more overheads and not less overheads.
Just on this slide as well, sorry, Matt, if you actually look at a lot of these that we talk about, they're not technology decisions as well. We've got a lot here that is around policy. So what are our strategies? What are our company's policies? As we talk about this, what will become very obvious is this is just not a technology change we've got to go through. It really is an organizational change and a change in the way we think about things. We've got to think about, as we're doing these strategies, what are we going to do about policies? You know, whether it's a simple which devices do we allow, how do we control those devices, down to what are the sort of OH&S requirements? You know, if people are working off devices this big every day, is that a challenge for us? What does our organization think about that if they choose to do that? So really, as part of this strategy, what we're going to talk about is a whole lot more than the technologies and give you some ideas there as well.
So as the world of work's changing, it is really, really important that your technology strategy begins to meet this. And I've kind of gone on about devices a bit, but it's not just about devices. It's also about all sorts of consumer technologies that are going to start to become pressurized onto IT and the expectation that they have on IT. So, you know, the LinkedIns, the Twitters, the Facebooks, all the social networking sites, the ability to contact each other, these are all consumer technologies. Using Hotmail, using SkyDrive, going outside of those corporate systems and storing data and communicating with other people. How do you get a handle on that, policies and control, and help people actually understand how to use these things? So beyond the device, how do you enable these? Do you turn them off? Do you let people freely use them? Do you give them guidance? Do you not? It's obviously a big challenge there. And I just wanted to raise the awareness of that because in some ways those systems are potentially even more pervasive than the new device movement of people trying to bring their own devices into work. The diagram behind me is a diagram by Jess3. It's on Creative Commons, so I just have to credit them. But as you can see, there's 663 million users of Skype, and the dark circle inside of each of these represents the mobile access to those services, and it's growing. So soon these services will pretty much over 75% of them will be accessed purely by mobile devices. Now, as you can see, a lot of these users will overlap, right? Skype users will be Facebook users who will be Hotmail users, but you can just see the sheer scale of the amount of people that are using these services outside of the organization. So when they come in and they can't video conference someone across the other side of Australia or across the other side of the world, they start to feel pressure. They start to feel, hang on, I can do this at home with something I downloaded for free. Why not I just download it here?
Just with that, how many people in their organization today have a policy about not using Facebook and Dropbox and all those sort of things to share? How many would say that policy is strongly adhered to by your users? Yeah, because what it is, the users see the value in these technologies and will go out and use them despite the sort of policies we put in place because there is benefit. It's helping them do their job. It's helping them to connect with customers. So no matter what we do in terms of, you know, we said the resist policy. The policy of resisting really just makes people work around it. People are the most inventive things in the world. They will find ways to work around anything we need to. So whether it's walking into a Telstra shop and buying, you know, a $100 wireless hub so I can get around your proxy and still do my Facebook at work, you know, they are the sort of things people will do. So really, again, when we're thinking about this, it's not about stopping people using these. It may be providing alternatives to consumer technologies, but it's really about that experience that they're getting with the consumer technologies. How can we replicate that in a controlled way inside the constraints of our organization?
Which brings us neatly on to what Microsoft likes to call the flexible work style. So I'm going to drill into technologies in each of these areas for IT pros to help enable some of that stuff, but still give you a level of control or audit or compliance, or potentially even just open up those users who want to be able to do this stuff, but in a more controlled fashion than they were previously. And as you can see behind me, you know, this is all about trying to give people an anywhere connection to corporate systems. It's all about trying to give them a personalized experience when they're in those systems, and it's about trying to make sure that you have the intelligent infrastructure, so you just manage your things that you need to, and it's less to worry about when you actually come to the IT piece.
And we've talked about organizations moving on and embraced it. You'll notice from Microsoft there, Desktop has vanished from how we're talking about things now. It is about flexible work styles. It is about the actual data, the applications, how users access this. So in terms of organizations embracing and moving forward, you know, organizations such as ours have jumped on board with this.
So here's some of the technologies that we think are useful for responsible consumerization of IT. As I say, it's about producing this responsible infrastructure. On the left, you can see, on the left, you're looking at on the right, the consumerization of IT technology issues. So there's a few things there. How do I limit device access? How do I do device policies? You can read all those things. And hopefully, by using some of the technologies on the right, it's almost like a Chinese menu, I guess. Choose off the pieces that you want. And I'll go into some of those. You should be able to begin to build up an infrastructure that enables you to meet some of those challenges on the left and also enable this opportunity.
So if we go in and have a look at these work styles and see what people want to do. So we've got our mate Ethan here. He's us. He's the guy that has to sort of look after this all and think about this all. But, yeah, he's got the challenges just like you guys have. So Matt, how are we going to help our friend Ethan here?
So Ethan wants to, ultimately wants a single tool to be able to manage all of his applications and provide that user an application wherever they might be. So he wants to be able to bring their devices in, but actually just feed down the application to each of those devices and have it follow them around. So, but he wants to do it in a secure and controllable manner, and he wants to do it in the most relevant manner for those devices. So, you know, if they've got a big PC or a thick, you know, desktop client, he wants to be able to deploy down the best experience. He pushes down the MSIs to that, and those ones that want to follow the users. If he's got his own device being brought in or a lightweight device or something that he wants to be able to get quick access to the application, he starts using AppV as the deployment mechanism for those same applications. And when they want to connect through to their desktop off devices that aren't connected to the domain, he wants to be able to provide them the same applications but through the remote desktop service so they can actually be able to access those things. But all have those accesses and those applications relevant to the user. So how are we going to do that? Well, I don't know how many of you have been to a System Center 2012 session, Configuration Manager 2012 session this week, but we've moved to this model of user-centric device management. So the idea of the user having multiple devices and also having an understanding in the back-end logic that this Configuration Manager 12 actually understands that the user has access to a certain number of apps, and those apps are tied to those devices, and the right deployment mechanism for those apps is in the devices. And that logic sits in what we call the application model. So the idea with this is you should be able to connect all the devices, be they smartphones, PCs, laptops, into System Center Configuration Manager 2012, and be able to manage them in a number of different ways. Now, we all know that not all the devices can be managed to the same level because they've got limitations, they're consumer devices. So what we're trying to do is bring in all as much policy and control as we possibly can into the tool so you can have a single pane of glass to see all those devices. And we've got two types of investment going into System Center. We've got the depth one, which is a broad feature set. It allows you to pick from multiple different types of application deployment. It enables you to replicate those apps between those users. So if you do a rebuild of a machine, those apps will just automatically stream down because it understands whose laptop that was when you did the rebuild. And it also enables those mobile devices that are like the embedded devices, ruggedized devices, Windows CE, Windows Phone, to actually push the cabinet files down and the applications down to those mobile devices. We've also taken all the stuff that used to traditionally sit with an Exchange administrator and put that into Configuration Manager 2012. Now, it still sits in Exchange, so the minute those devices connect to your corporate email service, the device has the policies and everything that the SCCM administrator configured for those devices. So regardless if they've got an iOS-based device, an Android-based device, a Windows Phone, it'll push down the PIM policies, the remote wipe, and you can actually get a nice graphical representation of the devices that are available in your estate and map those to the users, who's got which phones are currently connected to the network.
It also allows us to give you that one consistent experience. Because if we sort of think about it today, the fact we're managing mobile devices from Exchange, SCCM is doing our device management, really, as we look at what's going to be out there, being able to use one tool set, one place to manage these becomes very, very important. Automation, the sort of single pane of glass approach to management is critical when we're going to look at enabling the consumerization of IT and the multiple sort of device model.
And we've even been working with partners to make sure that we can understand how to deploy their applications. If you're using Citrix today, 2012 will be able to push down the relevant Zen app application to the relevant devices where we can't address that device platform. And it will do it in the same consistent manner as the application model. So we're trying to make sure that these apps follow the users and give people the best technology experience. You can see behind me there's a screenshot of the new software library. So this is what users actually see. So they can log into the browser fire up their internal app store that you've effectively created. And inside of that, they can see the applications they're allowed to download. And they don't even know how they're going to be delivered. They just pick the app they want, hit download. If they've got entitlement, well, they will have entitlement because it only shows them the ones they're entitled to, but it actually will push that straight down to their machine instantly. There's no scheduling it, there's no waiting for it. They actually just get that installed automatically onto their PC. So again, self-service, giving the control back to the user, making it user-centric, and giving them that paradigm that they're used to. You know, I'm used to going and grabbing my own apps from an app store. Okay, well, you know, we're providing you one here.
We can even take the credit card details, I'd imagine. So again, our mate Blake, he's a global business manager. You know, he is a gadget geek, Matt. He wants to be able to work on whatever he wants to, wherever. How are we going to help Blake?
Okay, so I'm guessing Blake wants to bring his own PC potentially into work, or a new type of Windows PC, but he wants it to be on the corporate network, but he still wants his own data on there. So Blake, if we introduce application virtualization and we introduce folder redirection, we can begin to service both those devices that Blake brings into the organization. So even though he's got his own home content on it, we can still encrypt that device, we can still push applications down to it without necessarily installing them, and we can actually begin to give him access to his data and have that follow him around. So you can actually redirect that data back using the folder redirection technology that's built into Windows 7. Now, we all know, we've all used roaming profiles before. If you haven't tried it with Windows 7 and Server 2008, it's changed a lot and become a lot more robust. So it's actually worth looking at, because actually we can begin to move around some of the key settings, big areas of data, and we also have partners that enable us to sort of extend that even further to what follows the user around. Alongside that, and we'll talk about this a little bit further, we also provide free SkyDrive accounts to anyone who has a Hotmail login. So there's 25 gig of data which potentially could also follow them around, but obviously that's outside the corporate network. So again, if they want their personal data to follow them around, we can use the technologies that are built into that Microsoft provides for free as part of the Live Essentials pack. One technology in particular, Mesh, and that Live Mesh technology will enable those files to follow that user around across the cloud into their devices. We also want to be able to make sure that he's secure on all these devices. Now, if he's using Windows 7 Enterprise or Ultimate, we provide the ability to put BitLocker onto that device, so you can actually policy push that BitLocker down to him, or we can enable it a number of other ways, but ultimately we can begin to encrypt that device and protect all the data that's on there, regardless if it's his personal data, which, you know, ultimately is still precious, and also begin to protect the data that you've got on there as a corporate asset. And you can also policy lock USB devices, so he has to be able to use BitLocker to go on there. Now, for those of you who haven't seen it, you effectively can plug a USB stick into a machine, encrypt that stick in minutes, and then actually anyone else you hand it to as a Vista or a Windows 7 machine can actually open that just simply with a password. If you've got an XP machine, you can open it in a read-only fashion with the same password, but it has to install a small utility or run a small utility. But that technology means you can effectively begin to use USB sticks to pass data around, which is still a favoured approach. People like that physical touch still today. But actually be able to control the data that's on those things. So if they go missing, you know that the device is encrypted, so you're not going to be able to fall foul of any of the data loss laws. And that's built out of the box. And then we've got partner encryption. So for those devices that, you know, obviously don't function in the network, there's the partners produce apps for those different platforms that actually enable you to encrypt those things. One particular company who's here at the stand, Jasco and i365 produce a tool that actually enables you to encrypt certain file areas on a PC and back those up to the cloud. So if that asset or that person leaves the organization, you as an organization can still hold that data and actually remotely kill the data on the laptop. So you can actually allow contractors to come in, create data for you, you have a backup of that, and you can actually remotely kill that as they leave the organization. So people are thinking about these scenarios and how can they cleverly use cloud technologies to embrace and change these things.
Just with that as well, you know, when I've spoken to a lot of customers, they say, well, it's okay, you know, our data's protected, it's in systems, and, you know, it's not on the user's laptop. Anyone know what a user's favorite productivity feature is? Anyone? You drag and drop, copy and paste. So as much as we like to think that that data is secure in our system, we can guarantee that somewhere there's a spreadsheet with that data in, there are Word documents with that data in, because the users have copied and pasted it, they want to manipulate it in their own ways, look at it in different ways. So even though we think potentially we may be secure, the encryption of those devices, because as we've talked about, users will work around anything we do, becomes vitally important to ensure that when, you know, they leave it in the back of a cab, they leave it in the airport, because those sort of things really don't happen, do they? That those devices are secure. And that'll move me on to my mate Frank here. So Frank shares, I think, the similar lifestyle to me and you, Matt. Very rarely in an office. He's always on the road. He's traveling. He's out and about. How do we actually help him take that office with him?
Scratching the bonnet of his lovely car as well.
It's right, he's got 3 kids, mate. The car's going to be a mess anyway.
So Frank's connecting using a technology we're all probably quite familiar with in this room, mobile broadband. He's got a 3G dongle, or he's got a 3G card built into his laptop. So how's he getting into the corporate network? Well, we don't want to give Frank a VPN connection, because that means he then has to fire up the connection software for his 3G dongle, connect to the 3G network, then fire up a VPN client and get his token out of his bag and connect in that way. And then he might get into a VPN connection that limits his scope of what he can get to in the network. So what we want to try and introduce is maybe a technology like direct access, and I'll go into a bit more detail here. For those of you who might not have seen this, it's a technology in Windows 7 and Server 2008 that effectively enables a transparent corporate connection to come into the network. So the guy just opens his laptop lid, connects to his 3G network, and it automatically allows him into corporate resources, internal websites, whatever he wants to get to, without having to fire up a connection, without having to click connect to my corporate LAN. It's kind of always on, always connected to that back end. You can also get to things that we've got exposed externally. So if we've got link or exchange over RPC over HTTPS, then those technologies can be sat in the DMZ facing outward. You can be able to connect to them seamlessly without the need for direct access. A lot of people don't enable Exchange ActiveSync for fear of other devices coming in, but actually it's a secure technology and a secure way of policy mapping and controlling those devices that come into that email service. And then you can also use SkyDrive. So as I've already alluded to, Microsoft gives 25 gig of data online to people to connect into. And SkyDrive is a really good service. It not only connects seamlessly to do replication inside of Windows through Live Mesh, but it also enables people to actually share externally, so they can actually enable to open up permissions to other people. So, simple example, I actually put my photos up there because my parents, and only my parents, can then see my photos rather than putting the whole lot on Facebook and enabling all my friends to see them. So you can actually begin to limit things and publish them, and rather than sending out gigs and gigs of data to people, you can actually just upload automatically to SkyDrive and then replicate that photo gallery down to all the other people, so they can open up an email, click a link and see a slideshow. That's just a simple use of it, but when you think about documents or sharing, I mean, I've actually used it for putting in RFI responses, sharing with the partner community, documents that they might need to get hold of, just because it's so simple to set up and yet still secure. So direct access. Now, this is a technology that's little used, but it pretty much enables you to begin turning your back-end services and web pages and email, etc., into almost like a resource pool, a service-led pool. So people are always connected, be they on the corporate LAN or outside of the corporate LAN, so they're always managed and they're always secure. And the way direct access does this is it actually establishes 2 tunnels as soon as the laptop opens. It's actually an IPv6 technology. But it will go over IPv4, so it will go over the internet and transport those packets. And effectively, it creates 2 tunnels. So your first tunnel is created to actually with a computer certificate. So it understands that the device is now connected. It's an authorized managed device. It's connected to the domain. So I'll actually let that device in, and then you can begin managing that before the user's even logged on. So you can begin seeing what apps they've got on there. You can asset check them. You can push policy to them, etc. And then the second tunnel is created for the user with both the computer certificate and the user's credentials. Now that tunnel obviously is the one that enables them to get to the various systems that you've enabled inside of your organization. And you can deploy direct access in a number of ways. There's one which we call edge-to-edge, which is your traditional model where it comes into a gateway, basically unencrypts the tunnel and allows them then to pass through to the next unencrypted device inside of your network. Now that's the model that a lot of people employ because it is familiar, it feels like a VPN. The other model is what we call end-to-end rather than edge-to-edge, and that means that the IPsec tunnel exists all the way to the end server that it hits. So it can come in through the gateway, find its way all the way to the resource that it's supposed to hit, and only when it gets to that resource does it then unencrypt the tunnel. So you can imagine you can actually create secure connections constantly all the way through your organization without the need to concentrate them through a gateway and give all the offload to there. The other big advantage of direct access, which a lot of my customers have found, is people don't like coming to the corporate LAN because when they log onto a VPN, loads of stuff starts happening to their machine. They get checked for things, they get checked for health, they get stuff pushed down to them. They're like, I just don't want to come onto this thing, right? And actually all they'll do is open up email because you've exposed that externally at the user's request. Now, direct access gets over that because you're constantly managing that machine. They just feel like they're on the LAN all the time. And you can actually see, you can even force them to come constantly through the proxies. So because they're using your DNS and your proxies, you can obviously control and see what traffic they're doing and filter that if you want. But they don't know that. Even though they're out on the internet, their corporate asset is still secure, maintained, managed, and going through the corporate proxies all the time and then back out to the internet.
Just with that as well, I think the important thing, as Matt mentioned, it's when people are on the road a lot. I was dealing with one customer, and they literally said even when people came in the office, they would not plug their laptops in because they knew that they were going to get the 6 weeks, the 2 months worth of updates down to them. They wanted to plug in and go. They didn't want to be delayed by that. They wanted to get straight on working. So by constantly making sure we can update them, we can deliver the updates to the OS, the security patches, their applications. Really, when we think about our security and compliance policies, we've probably got a policy that says, you know, for these critical type updates, they have to be deployed within a certain period of time. Now, without technologies like direct access, where we have a mobile workforce, that just becomes impossible to manage and ensure that we are at the compliance level we need to be. So that then takes me on to my friend Holly here. Now, Holly must just be out of her teens because she actually wants to do everything on her phone and work from that, Matt. So can we actually help Holly because, you know, surely all these things aren't available on her phone?
Yeah, I think we can. So I don't know how many of you have seen Windows Phone and some of the videos of the upcoming Mango update. There's a number of features in there that we've added to increase the productivity. Now, we've got a great Office experience today inside of there, so she wants to get real productivity done. She still has access to Exchange and SharePoint directly from the phone. The minute you set it up, it starts connecting back to those services, brings your contacts together, sorts those contacts, begins to actually deduplicate them so you can actually bring your personal life and your private life together. And actually then she can also connect to SharePoint directly inside of there as well. So she has the ability to pull down documents securely and sync them offline. She can actually open those things up and check them for comments and begin to review them. The Office experience is really strong inside the phone. In fact, the OneNote experience as well, if she begins to take notes and actually share those things amongst her organization, the phone automatically syncs those OneNotes with SkyDrive and actually pushes them back around to her desktop PC without her having to do anything. She literally just put in her live credentials and it uses that SkyDrive storage to move those notes around. So actually the ability to record audio notes and take pictures and actually have all that stuff replicate to both her team and her own laptops and stuff without having to do anything is really, really strong and actually enables her to begin to collaborate and work a lot better on the phone and across her other devices. It's also got strong access to other tools going forward, so we'll have access to sort of much tighter access to SharePoint and some of those internal sites, but also things like instant messaging and the collaboration social piece. Office 365 is another element of that. So, sometimes small organizations or if you don't actually want to deploy these enterprise tools yourself or you want quick access to them or just indeed you want to be able to get the latest and greatest and have Microsoft continue to run that infrastructure for you, Office 365 is the way of delivering both Exchange and SharePoint, and the phone can also automatically connect into those services going forward and be able to actually share data and connect back to those cloud services. So you can actually deploy a service and give someone a device without having touched a piece of IT infrastructure other than a now got the ability to do very, very dynamic productivity platforms for people. The other key piece of technology, if you want to be able to do this from your own perspective, so if you want to be able to actually expose your own internal SharePoint 2010, Exchange 2010 in a secure manner, is Unified Access Gateway. Now, it's a technology that actually enables you to apply policy. So direct access, as we just alluded to, is on and off, and it's an IPv6 technology. So either you're on the network or you're not. Now, a few of the questions we asked at the beginning were, should they have access from any location? Should they have access to all data? And it's kind of like, well, actually, it's a bit of a misnomer. You probably don't want that. If they're in certain countries or they connect to certain networks, you probably want them to have slightly more locked-down access. So UAG actually enables you to apply business rules and policy on top of that. So if they're coming in from a certain network using a certain authentication or from a certain device at a certain time of day, you can actually set those business rules up and begin to lock down and restrict the data that's built that they'll actually be able to see through that device. It can also do refactoring, so HTML refactoring. So if stuff comes through on the fly, it can actually remove things that you've got marked as confidential inside and actually begin just to expose the data that's not confidential in the right way to the right device. And also refactor it so it's mobile and not maybe for a full screen application. So they can actually refactor it so it works better on mobile devices. And the whole point behind this is Microsoft sees UAG as the way of kind of front-ending all of these things to be able to enable them for internet access and for access across the net, but in a secure manner. So you're not just restricting the data that you're flowing out of that thing, but you're also enabling the user whenever they're on, you're keeping the good people good, right? So when they're in the right networks, in the right country, on the right devices, they get full access. When they aren't, they start getting more and more restricted access and more redacted access, because you don't necessarily want to provide everything to everything. And UAG gives you that kind of central console and way of doing that.
So, my mate David here. I don't think this scenario really exists. You know, I've never met anyone with any non-domain joined PCs and things that they have to manage and keep secure.
Yeah.
No one's got any of those, have they?
It's probably the biggest question. How do we manage PCs that aren't on the domain? How do we keep these people healthy? And how do I let them on my network just to see the things that I need them to get them done? So if they're contractors or they're people bringing their own PCs. So there's a couple of ideas here. Now, for those of you who haven't heard of it, Windows Intune is our kind of cloud management solution. So we've built a solution in the cloud that enables people to manage PCs, patch them, update them, get visibility of those assets, all from the cloud, all from a console. So they install an agent, they install some security software as part of that, and actually from then on they can begin to patch and update these things. You can hear more about it because John Pritchard's running a session later on and should be able to go into more depth around that in the day. Shameless plug. But if you want to hear more about Intune and what that might be able to enable you to do, especially for external access and people like that, and also what the roadmap is of that, then go to that session and you'll get a lot of in-depth information there. The other one is network access protection. So this is a little used technology that's part of Server 2008, Windows 7, Vista, and XP SP3. That basically any device, so it doesn't have to be a device that's owned by you or domain joined, any device that comes onto your network, wireless or wired, can connect to what we call the policy server there. Basically check against the policy servers for what's your patch status currently against the current WSUS database. What are you kind of, what required updates are you missing as an asset that's just come onto my network? What does your AV look like? Because now AV inside of Windows now hooks into a common set of files that actually enables us to check AV status and have even third-party AVs actually come back and check their current signature files and what they're using. If it's not policy compliant, well, actually, you can do this using just DHCP rather than having to use any sort of security technologies. But effectively, the user can then just get automatically redirected to a VLAN or a set of subnets that actually he can then go and get remediation from inside your estate. So you can have SCCM servers there to patch the machine. You can have WSUS sat in there. You can have the AV signature files. You can send them out to the internet to go and grab that stuff through a secure proxy. Then it will go back and check again, and once it's policy compliant, it will then be able to join the corporate network. So they can give it an IP address that gives it an open access, or if you're using IPsec as your authentication technology, you can actually begin to authenticate that user onto your network using an IPsec certificate. So it's actually a very strong technology. It's not a security technology, it's a health technology, but actually just to enable you to begin to check machines that are coming onto your network and begin to give you some level of control and visibility of those machines, it's very, very strong and kind of actually out of the box. We don't charge for this technology, it's just part of Server 2008. And then the other technology that potentially would enable, better access and more security inside of the network, as I've already alluded to, is IPsec. So a lot of people don't enable this because it seems difficult to implement, it seems complicated. Hang on, well, I'm going to make every asset talk to every asset now. How do I do that? But actually it enables you to kind of flatten those moats that you begin to build between different IT infrastructures and networks. So I won't go into any depth here, but ultimately, with IPsec, you're actually putting that onto the authentication of the client. So every client is able to talk to every other authenticated domain-joined or IPsec-enabled client. So you can begin to build these logical pools inside of assets. So as you can see behind me, you've got the stuff that you would call, isolated, the things that are really, really top-secret PII. You can actually begin to put them in a restricted set of IPsec policies. Then outside of that, you can have a semi-trusted environment. So you can have things like SharePoint or file shares and things that people are allowed to use in a common fashion. And then outside, you've got untrusted devices. So these guys are not allowed in your network. So if they come and plug in a network cable, they'll just be rejected access to any of the servers. Now, the way Microsoft implements this is vendors can actually come in and plug into our network, and the only thing they can see are the external-facing proxies. They can't actually attack, see, ping any of the servers, any of the assets, any of the PCs on the network, even though they're plugged into the same LAN cable as me, who has an IPsec policy, is domain joined, is secure. And now it works with NAP as well. So if you're not actually in policy for NAP, it can restrict which of those domains you're able to look at, which of those network domains. So I might only be able to look at semi-trusted sources and not really well-trusted sources, such as my finance packages or HR web, until I've got the updates, until I've got my machine up to scratch with the network policy. This kind of builds. And this technology is not enormously difficult to implement. If you actually you can switch it into monitoring mode, so you can actually begin to check what asset's talking to what on your network and actually see those relationships. Then you can actually apply a policy, but not make it active. So you can actually have all the machines ready to go, and you can begin to simulate different areas and switch it on in a controlled manner. So actually, as you begin to switch IPsec on, you can begin to build up these boundaries and get more of an understanding about who's talking to what across the network, what's chatting to what, which assets need access to which assets. And you can actually see that as part of Windows, as part of the monitoring mode as you're beginning to implement this.
So now I've got my friend Carol. Now Carol is looking at how she can use desktop virtualization as a way to provide access. So there are a number of different models we can use that we're talking through. Desktop virtualization is really, as I said, something that's come to the fore in the last couple of years, and we've been on a cycle about what it does, what doesn't it do, how do we use it. But if we go ahead and look at, what Carol can do as part of this, really, it's about providing access. I don't want to deliver anything out to those devices, but how do I provide that desktop experience, no matter what sort of device it is. So this is really where Microsoft's virtual desktop infrastructure, where our partnership with Citrix comes into play. We're allowing users to build and centrally manage within our data center those desktops. We're seeing a lot of this when we look at some of the scenarios in how do we deal with partner organizations? How do we allow them to connect to our systems? So whether it's government departments that need to talk together, whether it's a industry where I've got a lot of suppliers that may be offshore, or I need to talk to my manufacturers and allow them to access things like my ERP systems. But I don't want to put data out on those devices. I don't want to have to worry even about, are their devices patched? What do we do? How do we provide that access? So this is really around being able to put that centrally, manage it. It uses a lot of the same infrastructure components. So coming in via a web portal, using the access gateway to authenticate people and manage people as part of that, but then giving us access to those desktops. So it really becomes down to, and making this scalable, how do we manage that, how we do it? The massive investments Microsoft made in our technologies around Hyper-V, Windows 7, and I say with Citrix in terms of the protocols needed, we're really moving this scenario to be a first-class citizen. If we think about the past, a lot of these technologies have been around. Terminal services has been around forever. But when we actually look at were people going to use it, did it make sense? Did we have the networks there available to make this? We didn't really. How many of you over the past have tried to implement a server-based computing type scenario? Yeah, a few people. How was the user acceptance of that? It tended to be, well, we've got to use it, or it's good in this scenario and it sort of works, but would we do it for everything? And today we probably still wouldn't do it for everything, but we'd look at the scenarios, and the fact we're really investing in these areas means that it is viable and a lot more cost-effective to do it in scenarios now.
So we've covered the majority of technologies in that list, in one way or another. Now, the technology issues of how do we do IP classification, how do we implement rights management, I haven't covered those in any detail, but most of the other ones are kind of little technologies that you can switch on in the box. They don't necessarily require much investment. A lot of customers already own these things. So actually, most of these little things can actually begin to form a Chinese menu, like I said, of ideas. So you can kind of go, I've got some technologies. How do I start to implement those? Where should I implement them? How do I switch these things on? What are they going to do for me? So the third bit we wanted to cover is, okay, well, what do we need to think about strategies here? How do we bring this stuff together? So quite simply, we just want to think about creating a rich matrix of looking at different ways of building this cumulative security in this responsible COIT session. So think about the who, and we'll go into that. Think about the what. So what are we talking about here? Devices. We're talking about data. How do people have access to those things? And then we'll think about location. Now, this is one that's kind of had less work done on it, I would say, up to date in most IT departments, but actually it's becoming more important as people travel around more. So with regards to who, your standard policies, I guess, today are usually around a few things. So read, write, or full control. Now, this comes down to the file system. It's kind of like, what do people have access to? Do they have access to the system? Do they not? It's on and off. It's black and white. Whereas actually, what we're talking about is trying to build a more scalable policy for these things. So thinking about the department that person's sitting in, thinking about the role they do inside of that department, thinking about the service that they're trying to access, and actually, if you build the policy per service, per department, per unit, and then actually begin to matrix those things, you'll start seeing most of these people don't need access to all of the systems that we're giving them access to. Or actually, there's a few users we've identified that need more access, and this is why they're always screaming that they can't actually get to these things. So it's beginning to think about building policies at each of these layers. This is just for the who piece. And ultimately, I just want to raise the change that's occurred, and this is why it's really important to think about people. Back in 1979, you used to be able to buy a 570 mainframe from IBM, and it would cost $5 million, and it would do 1 MIP. And in your pocket, you've got a phone that probably does 3 MIPs, I'd imagine. So actually, just thinking about what people, where's the expensive part of the equation here? It used to be control IT because it's expensive and we can't afford to give it to everybody. And now it's everybody's got IT and the people are expensive. They need access to these things. So they really need to be thought about again with some of the systems that might be in place around what exactly they need exposure to. Then the important thing there is actually what you'll start to come across, and this is what a lot of customers come across, is it's all about identity then, isn't it? Isn't this knowing who the user is and what they're entitled to get access to and why? Well, yes, it is. But then the amount of people I've been and seen, including my old customers, which have had credentials in systems that people can still access 10 years after they've left because they're just too scared to switch them off. No one knows what will happen if we turn these credentials off, what's hard-coded, what's not. And actually, that's just a big security hole in their environment. Whereas if you begin to look at your identity, and Microsoft does tools for this, such as Forefront Identity Manager, and begin to consolidate the various different points at which they interact and where they exist in the systems, you can begin to come up with a single record, a single piece of information that says, okay, well, this is the user, this is all the things that they're touching today, this is what they need to do. And these technologies begin then to facilitate their access to those systems. So if you've got a guy who's just moved into a storage group and he used to be the Exchange admin and he knows a lot about Exchange, you can actually send out a management request from these systems just for a week or for 2 days for this guy to get access to Exchange. So you can say, well, actually, I want him back in because we've had a problem and only he knows what's going on. And rather than having to give him your credentials or someone else's credentials, you can literally enable him through a simple click button in the email system. Yes, I want to approve this guy access to that temporarily. Because identity then becomes the facilitative nature. This needs to sit at the center of pretty much everything you do with your policies.
Just with the identity as well, I think we've all probably been through, any of us that have been around in these last 10 years, the single identity, the one directory, the one place that everything is stored. But if we look at the approach that's changed there, it really is around what we've learned. The information is updated in different systems. It needs to be in different systems. What becomes key is how we pull that together from those different systems to present that view. Getting everything to one or putting a system in place that does everything is just not going to work. And it also becomes more and more important as we've talked about these enabling technologies. How do we connect that with things like our partner organizations so that when someone does get terminated or leaves the partner organization, the flow-on effect comes to our systems and their IDs get removed from there. I think about some of the things I have had access to over the years in various places that are partner systems. You created your account. I don't know if they ever know that I've moved on from the organizations and things like that. So that becomes vitally important as well as part of that identity strategy.
And I'll get into this model a bit more, but it's thinking about LBI, MBI, and HBI. Now, what do they stand for? Well, they're what Microsoft calls low business impact, medium business impact, and high business impact. So things that really do affect your business. And it's thinking about which people have that impact on your business and what sort of level of access should they have based on that and level of trust that they get given. And we'll think about that model more as we get into devices as well. So now we're on to the what. So we've gone from the who to the what. So we're thinking, okay, so we've got different types of devices now. So we've got unmanaged devices. So we're talking about contractor PCs, smartphones, things that can't be managed potentially. They're coming into our organization. We've got policy managed devices. We've got ones that do connect in that light fashion to our infrastructure. And we can give them the PIN code and we can remote wipe them and we can track those assets. And then we've got the fully managed devices, the ones that we can encrypt and push policy to and control and give access to, and they can authenticate and they get Kerberos tokens, so they can pass that on to other systems and we can let them into our infrastructure. Those things are like corporate PCs, and we're talking about virtual desktops. So when you think about the what with those devices, it's kind of beginning to map on, again, LBI, HBI, and MBI, where are these devices sitting? If someone can't get their Nokia smartphone on today, has that got a low business impact? Has it got a high business impact? If it's connected, what impact does it have? If they lose it? So again, just thinking about the policy across that scale, what happens with those different systems? And then the data. Now, this is arguably the one that becomes more important and becomes to clarify the picture slightly. So when you look at LBI, MBI, and HBI, you've got different types of records, different types of devices, different types of people approaching, and actually the systems all change. So if someone actually gets hold of a cell phone voicemail, arguably what's that going to do to your business? Well, potentially nothing on its own because it's a fragment of information that has no context to it.
Someone gets hold of a medical news, limited.
Well, maybe, yeah. If they get hold of a medical record or someone's expenses or some source code to some IPR that you've got, well, that's enormous, right? You don't want those things floating around on a smartphone. So where does this data sit? How do we actually make sure that we've only got approved devices getting to approved data sources? And also, the reverse of that, how do we make sure that these users are being presented with the right amount of information? It's a subscription and a publishing model, right? It shouldn't just be a control mechanism. It should be, well, hang on, you're in finance, so you should have published to you in a transparent manner all the tools that you need to see. You should have all the things that are relevant to you. In fact, all the things your colleagues think are relevant to you as well, thinking about the social aspects of this. But we also need to make sure that they're only getting that in the way that makes sense to them. Then we think about where. Now, this is the bit that's had arguably the least amount of conversations and the least amount of detail given to it in most organizations. Not just the where with regards to the network, but arguably that makes a difference as well, because wireless is inherently less secure than wired. But also not all devices can connect over wired. So hang on a minute, how are we going to do this? How are we going to make sure we've got the right security in place over those networks? Also, internet access. Do we do VPN? Do we do direct access? For which systems and which devices? And which, do we do HTTPS? The most important piece, I think, is geography. So this is the piece that kind of is needed to have a lot of work done on it, because ultimately geography is becoming more important than ever. Some countries have specific restrictions in place around what information they can look at, which some of you will be fully aware of. Some countries have more open policies. In fact, they have absolutely no control over things like piracy and stealing of data and reading what's coming out of the network port of that machine. So again, looking at those countries and that map of geographies, so when they're in those countries and people travel to those places, should they be able to whip out their consumer device and get access to your corporate systems when they're in one of those countries that's got restrictions in place? Because arguably you're liable for it, or actually you could lose that IPR because it's being tracked by that organization or that geopolitical organization inside of that country. So you have to kind of layer these things up over and over time. And again, when you start thinking about them with regards to what's got low business impact, what's got medium, what's got high, it begins to make it a bit easier to figure out which devices in which geographies and what types of users should have access to these different systems. So trying to put all that together is what we call a responsible strategy for consumerization. So trying to figure out who they are, how much network they've got, what time it is, where they're coming in from, what information they're trying to get access to. So you're not only facilitating people to have that information, you're also restricting things they shouldn't be. And if you just take some simple examples behind me, we've just mapped a level of access against a level of trust. Now, pretty much anyone can do this with their corporate systems, and you can do it with multiple systems or just focus on a couple of key ones. And obviously, we've lumped line of business together in one big block here. But actually, if you begin to look at, okay, well, I've got a level of trust here, managed to unmanaged, and this comes down to the device or the user. It depends on which way you want it. You can go trusted or untrusted. And actually, then we've got a bunch of systems. Well, okay, they can access their email and stuff, but then we're also going to put rights management in place on top of email, because that means then we're restricting only the managed devices being able to see those rights managed emails. And that's a technology you can switch on in Exchange and switch on in part of Windows Server and begin to start looking at and trying to figure out how do we do sort of digital rights management in one area, but actually still give people access to email that's not classified, isn't controlled. Again, documents, the same sort of thing again. Now, it's just by mapping this out, you'll start to see a clear correlation between some of these technologies that we've presented on and even more you'll start to see from our partners, etc., and where they can begin to facilitate doing the piece on the right with the managed, but also doing the piece with the unmanaged for other devices and give you some of the controls and some of the restrictions that you don't want or do want on those devices, and you can actually begin to switch those things on and off. So just to quickly wrap up and then leave it open for questions. So we talked about it. So consumerization is here, and it's only going to keep getting bigger. And I just want you to be aware that this device explosion is about to happen. So it's just about kind of making sure that you do try to embrace that. This is the kind of message. We think it's good that users are passionate about technology.
Just from an embrace side as well, I think here in Australia, when I talk to my colleagues around the world, and Matt commented on this when he came over from the UK, we're in a unique position. If we look at what we need to provide to our employers today, our workforce, we're struggling to get resources. So we've got to be able to increase the productivity of our people today. We've got to make it easier for them to work and be productive as part of that. We've got to help our organizations introduce these things like the flexible work policies, for example, because that, again, is going to help our organizations attract people. We've been through the we pay more, we pay more, we pay more. We can't keep going along that. We've got to think about new ways that we can bring people into the workforce, even expand the workforce out. By things such as flexible working. Can we get people that aren't currently working today engaged within our organizations? I know certainly at Microsoft that flexible work policy helps us keep and retain talent, but also what we've just done at Microsoft by embracing this. In our Sydney office, we've just given a floor back in a building that 2 years ago we were trying to move out of because it was too full, and we've actually got more people now. If we look at the cost of real estate, that is massive cost savings for our organization because we can work from anywhere. We are flexible enough. So this strategy is not your typical IT, lower cost, lower cost. There are going to be costs associated with this. But if we look at it in terms of the return and what it means to our organization, it's about that enabling, that embracing. And as soon as we can align that up with our policies and our organization strategies and goals, these sort of projects become a whole lot easier to do.
And I just want to highlight that Microsoft does have a lot of capability and does have a lot of investment going into how can we enable both these scenarios. We invest in consumer technologies and enterprise technologies, and we're almost unique in the IT marketplace in doing that. You know, we understand what consumers are doing because of Hotmail and because of Xbox and because of Windows Phone and all the things that we've put in the consumer space. We're also trying to make sure that that stuff sits back into the enterprise and think about, okay, well, what's the working model? What are people desiring? How can we make it easier for IT to bring these people into the organization? So you obviously see some of these technologies such as Intune coming out that are kind of enabling those scenarios. And it's also just try and think about your strategy. So if you haven't done it today or you haven't thought about it, actually, it's worth sitting down and revisiting from scratch what you're going to be able to do to enable these Gen Y people to get back into the organization. Because there's a huge wave of these guys going to hit soon. And ultimately, just tear up what you've currently got in place if you have to, because otherwise it will just become restrictive, it will be difficult to attract talent, there's going to be some things happening, whereas you could actually turn that around and become a really attractive place to work, really flexible work style. Like Leon just said, you know, the ability to free up buildings and actually generate business cases from these things. IT's never had a more unique position to be able to do that, especially not from this sort of movement. This is people bringing their own stuff in. They're passionate about it. We should enable that. We should help them become successful.
So, yeah, and just, you know, from myself, I think to wrap up, it really is, this is coming, it's going to hit. Whether you want to jump on this early and embrace it and take advantage and drive those advantages for your organization, or you want to sit there. It's really up to you guys, and you guys within your organizations are the ones that have got to drive this, show how it can be done, and change some of the mindsets. You know, it's not easy in all organizations, but, you know, certainly in a lot we see, it's the CEO that's asking for this stuff. It's the senior management that want these scenarios to enable them. So getting them on board, it's a unique time for us in IT to jump on this and drive it through. So with that, we'll open the floor to any questions. One up at the back. So, yeah, you, sir.
Yeah, I'd just like to add maybe a couple of comments which aren't intended to be negative, but just to highlight some of the issues we've found with this. I come from an organisation that about a year ago decided to do a complete 180-degree turn and go from a totally Microsoft world where everything was controlled. And, you know, if you had a company laptop, you couldn't do much with it. And we decided we were going to turn totally 180-degree round and accept that that wasn't going to work anymore. And probably the biggest thing we've found in this, and the biggest difficulty we're grappling with, and it's come through again today, is that we want to keep our back end, our servers and everything Microsoft. And when outsiders come along and plug their own personal devices in and so on, we found we can cope with that pretty well using some of the techniques you've already touched on. So long as the device they're wanting to plug in is a Microsoft-oriented device. But it all starts totally falling over when Fred the contractor comes along and wants to plug in his Linux laptop. Or somebody comes along and starting to connect their iPad to the corporate network.
Yeah.
Lock them out so they can't see anything or do anything, but then we've totally defeated the whole purpose of our policy. And today, listening to you, I still heard that coming through an awful lot, that this is going to be fine so long as you're talking mainly about people on a homogeneous.
Well, I mean, part of that, the answer is that's where the partnership with Citrix comes in terms of extending out those Windows applications and those Windows desktops to any device. Are those devices always the best device to be able to access and use for it? And you've actually got to think about the right device for doing the right things. So, you know, just because I want to work on my phone doesn't mean everything is going to work on that phone. There are limitations we actually accept, but really, you know, the embracement of any device, I say that partnership with Citrix, when you look at what they can deliver down in terms of applications or even via a browser to be able to connect in, they become the strategies. And that's what you've got to think about in terms of it.
I think you touched on a really relevant point there, because I was speaking to a gentleman earlier this week, Nick, who presented up on stage during the IT Pro kickoff. And he was saying that his son, who's 4, says to him, "Can I watch Cars? Cars on your phone?" So he whips out his Windows phone, hands it to him, and he plays the film. Then he pulls on his mum's leg and says, "Can I watch Cars?" And she's like, "No, I've only got a candy bar phone that's 10 years old. I can't do films, sorry, I can't do that." So the expectation that you can do everything on everything is there. already set. I mean, he's 4, so by the time he gets into the workforce, he's going to be like, why can't I get to my X, Y, Z from my, ABC? That expectation's only getting bred into people to expect to get those pervasive screens. And I think it comes down to we have to collaborate and work with a wider partner community. We have to think a lot about interoperability, especially as we're building in. If you've read Steven Sinofsky's blog recently, he's talking about the process we go through just to get USB 3 to be a first-class citizen inside an OS. Now, there's a lot of devices for USB 3 and all that sort of stuff. It seems like such a simple problem. We've done it many times before, but it's a huge engineering challenge to make sure it's consistent and works with every device and works consistently. So you're right. A lot of this stuff is going to be a first-class citizen of Microsoft Technologies because we've got control and we've tried to make that work across our devices and as many as we can. But equally, people are becoming innovative and we're becoming, I guess, more open to bringing things like Exchange ActiveSync into Configuration Manager. So you as an IT pro begin to be able to manage those devices slightly better up to where we're allowed to be. But those devices aren't necessarily ready for all the enterprise stuff that you might want to do with them. So I guess that's going to change over time as maybe the devices begin to accept more enterprise functionality, and the other way around, Microsoft begins to try and build in as much management as we can for those third-party devices. It's kind of a bit of a building picture, but it's a very relevant point.
And the other piece, though, as well, is really it jumps back to the start. What you were providing is probably the 2001 experience, and they want the 2010. So pulling you up to the 2010 Microsoft experience, that's mine and Matt's job. So that's another strategy that we probably need to help you guys with.
I mean, just touching on another story, my old customer used to, they actually started building out APIs on Windows Azure to expose their internal systems. So rather than doing a big SOA project, they actually built a few APIs out for consumer applications. And the consumer applications became so successful and had some functionality in them that actually meant that the guys who were working in the task on the floor were going out and buying iOS devices so they could access those consumer apps to do more with their job. And then they realized at that point, well, hang on, if we expose all our data via Azure, we can actually begin to hook up tiny apps for each of these devices in a manner that makes sense for our workers. And that became, it's something that no one had ever looked at. Before it was like, well, our backend's our backend, and all the devices out there are either consumer or enterprise, and we don't do both. But actually, by creating that motion and beginning to use flexible, tiny applications in a cloud service, they could begin to expose a lot of this data and enable these task workers to have all the data they wanted. But it was just a unknown discovery at that point. They kind of came across it and then decided, well, this is our strategy now.
Any other questions?
Is there any thought or work going towards providing the kind of remote access, the virtualization, all that, but in a kind of caching kind of way for when connections do fail, do fall down?
Smart client kind of.
Yeah, so the online, offline type scenarios. So if you look at a lot of the technologies, sorry, I'm just going to repeat the question. The question was really around how can we provide the online, offline capabilities? A lot of these capabilities are only available if I'm connected to the network, and as we know, certainly in Australia, we can always have a network, it's just the cost of that network goes up. But yeah, a lot of the technologies and a lot of the thinking is around that. So again, if we look at technologies such as things like application virtualization today, they'll take the isolation, we can deliver it locally, it will run, they'll update centrally. We look at sort of where the industry is going around desktop virtualization on there. We are looking at how do we have those capabilities to deliver, virtualize, manage, push those images out. So there are a number of technologies there today. Is it seamless today? Absolutely not. Are there still challenges that need to be overcome to make that potentially the mass adoption? Absolutely. I mean, one of the key things we learned in virtualization that prevents a lot of this, we can do it very easily with servers. Move virtual machines about, drop them here, they just work. The client device and the way it runs its workload and everything it needs to connect to, all those different devices, they mean it's a whole different ball game. And that's where a lot of the hype from a few years ago about VDI in particular being the answer to everything really fell over because we tried to take what we'd done on the server and drop it on the client device, very different. Are we thinking and developing and looking at how we embrace that? Are partners doing that? Absolutely. So I think we'll see that move forward a whole lot over the next couple of years.
And there are some technologies that are kind of taking that approach. So if you look at SCCM 2012, it can actually stream application packages down in the background, pre-deploy them, make sure it can even do it when the user's not logged on. It can do it overnight. So it's trying to, obviously, once they do have a connection, to capitalize on that as much as possible. And obviously, if you put app V on top of that, and we have the ability to stream down very quickly the first feature block of that application, they can get the experience like the application is there, and in the background just start feeding the rest of the app down. So there is still the online, offline, but again, it all comes down to that application architecture and what you're looking at, because smart client applications are where people are focusing. Because if you build HTML5 page and the connection goes down, well, you've lost everything you were looking at. Whereas if you have a smart client app that's caching those pieces of information, then it can sync back to the background API. So I think that thin veneer app and cloud service piece is only going to get stronger and stronger and stronger as you try and build out pieces of functionality.
And when you look at the strategy, around the cloud, it's software plus services because of these exact scenarios. We need to be able to work. If I'm sat on a plane, I want access. I want to be able to do certain things. So there are going to be scenarios where that makes absolute sense, but that's certainly a strategy and a strategy that's only going to get stronger, and technologies are going to get better. Any final questions before we need to wrap? Well, thank you very much for joining us so early on a Friday morning after a party. But that's what IT guys do. They just make it happen. They work through things. So thank you very much, guys.